My name is Jeff Dunn. I'm President of Dunn Associates. I think Dunn Associates has a good reputation, and I think that as a result, we have been blessed to have had opportunities we didn't expect and didn't necessarily go after, but were proposed to us, probably because of our reputation that we do what we say we're going to do. Another gentleman who was in real estate said, "Jeff, I think I have a good investment for some of our clients, and it's buying numerous subdivided parcels, but in a bulk purchase of some land down south of Canyon City." And I had never bought that kind of land, but I thought I was fairly smart in analyzing the market. So we went ahead and bought it, and I sold it to a longtime client of mine. The client, when he handed over the check to me for the purchase, said, "Jeff, what happens if I ever need to sell?" And I said, "Mark, don't worry about it. If you can't find somebody in the marketplace that wants it, I'll buy it back from you for what you had in it." Little did I realize how prophetic that offer was, because 4 years later, he came, knocked on my door, and said certain circumstances dictated he needed to raise money, and I needed to buy those lots back from him. I investigated, and those lots were worth about 50 cents on the dollar, so therefore I wasn't very astute in that particular selection. But I had promised that. I didn't have the money, went down to the bank, borrowed it, and paid him, and took possession of the properties. That gentleman did not know that the land had declined substantially in value and that it took me decades to get out of it. When we were designing and planning the Palisades here at Broadmoor Park, we knew that it had bad soils. When we were getting prices for construction, we had one contractor say, "I can save you $750,000 if we just use a certain," we'll describe it as spread footings, not to be overly technical, as opposed to drilling caissons. We knew that the engineers had recommended caissons in excess of 500 caissons going as deep as 30 feet. The contractor said, when I asked him if I didn't do caissons, what was going to happen to the building, and he said, "In time it'll shift, but it won't shift more than 3 or 6 inches. And as long as you buy it and flip it to somebody else, what do you care?" We sought out the advice of engineers to determine the extent of the potential problems were we not to use caissons. And it was certainly the dollar factor was a consideration, but that didn't last very long on the discussion table. My son and son-in-law and I, regardless of whether we held the property for 2 years or 20 years, we were going to make sure that it sat on firm ground. When we were designing the Palisades, we had just sold a community up in Brighton that we needed to sell to have the funds to build the Palisades. That particular community was 2 stories, and one day I was there when the fire marshal came in and said, "We're going to do a surprise fire drill." Never has happened anywhere in Colorado. This gentleman thought that maybe we had some residents who weren't physically able to evacuate the building in the event of a fire from the 2nd floor. I was glad I was there because the fire marshal was right. There were half a dozen residents who couldn't or wouldn't evacuate their apartment. And I determined at that time that I would never build a community that didn't have a wheelchair ramp or wheelchair accessibility out of every level. Because when there's a fire drill, the electricity is shut down to the elevators, and therefore they have to have another way to evacuate the building. This is not an inexpensive process, particularly on our site here at the Palisades, and that costs us in excess of $75,000 to do these wheelchair ramps. It's our belief that every resident, and for that matter staff member, should be able to evacuate in the event of a fire or another disaster. and we shouldn't have the firemen have to choose between fighting the fire and helping our resident. As many wonderful people that touched my life and had an influence on me, none more than my wife of 46 years and her family. And she came from a farm in southwestern Kansas, so I really think that she and her family epitomized the Midwestern values and ethics. And the best way I can describe her good common sense and the ability never to lie is when I explained to her one day how excited I was after getting a loan on a real estate project. And most of the time on real estate loans, you pledge the property, but you also give a personal guarantee. In this particular case, the lender did not require a personal guarantee. And so I thought I was the smartest guy in the world. So I went home to brag to my wife about that, and she listened to it all very patiently, and she said, so because you're not personally liable on this, if the project starts to have trouble, would you walk away from it? And I said, no, I'd never do that. And she said, so what's the big deal? And I really thought that that really explained, if you make a promise, irregardless of whether somebody's going to force you to keep it or not, or if you're going to be forced into a financial hardship, that really isn't the deciding factor. If you have your right ethics, it's really what belief you have and the integrity you have to follow through with what you promise. There's a bronze that I have in my office, and let me read to you a short verse that the creator, the sculptor, wrote on that. When two men meet, an agreement made, the terms of the deal, the plans are laid. Each man gives his seal by the grip of his hand. On his word of honor, he takes his stand. These days, there are contracts all written out, so there is nothing to dispute about. But if a man won't stand on his word understood, a piece of paper won't make it good. In any ethical or moral situation that people, particularly when you financially can't afford it. It's easy to make the right decision when you can afford it financially, but if you financially can't afford it, but you follow through with a decision that you know is right, that I think is more the mark of a man or a woman.